So, just a few moments ago, we did an investigation to see which liquid was more dense. And we know that the syrup, the honey, is the most dense because it sank down to the bottom. We know that our oil is the least dense because it is floating up here on top. And my water is more dense than the oil, but my water is less dense than the syrup. Okay?
Honey.
So, since we have our bottle already ready, we're now going to check objects. Which objects are going to be more dense or less dense? And you're even going to have to think, might they sink down to the bottom of the water but float on top of the honey? Are they going to float all the way on top of the oil, or are they going to sink through the oil and float on top of the water? Okay. So in your journal, we are now on page 10. And this is relative density, part 2. It's a sequel. Relative density, part 2. And today is it's the same day. We're on the same day, actually. The same day. All right. Because you have your bottles, so we're going to do the same day. All right. Question. Remember, we're going through the steps of the scientific method. What is always first? It is the question. The question is, which objects will be more dense and which objects will be less dense. Okay, and here are our objects. So we have our toothpick, a nail, a bead, a marble. Hopefully you still have these when we did our magnetism, the paper clip, and a penny. Okay, so to record our results, we are going to make a table. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to come down for 7. All the way across. And we have our first row. We're going to put our objects. So I have the toothpick, the nail, the bead, the marble, paper clip, and the penny. Okay. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my hypothesis. So I'm going to guess. And here you're going to tell me, where do you think it's going to end up? So like for the marble, do you think it's going to sink all the way down to the bottom? Or do you think it's going to float on top of the syrup? So you need to tell me where you think it's going to be. Do you think the bead's going to float all the way on top of the oil? So you're going to make a little hypothesis, float on oil, okay? So that means I think that it's less dense. It's got that hole in it, so I'm guessing it's going to float. All right, so you're going to pause the video and you're going to make hypothesis for the rest of the objects. What do you think they're going to do? Are they going to sink or are they going to float? Once you've made your hypothesis, now we're ready to test and find out the results. Okay, so we're going to start with the toothpick. And he's kind of, oh, you know what? I forgot to add in here the cork and the styrofoam. Oh, look, 2 extra things. We'll add them. Take my toothpick, and I just kind of break it in half. Put it in there. Looks like my toothpick is going to float on the oil. So I'm gonna write down my results. Okay, so my toothpick is less dense. The nail. Here goes the nail. Where did he go? Do you see him? Oh, he's right there on the bottom. You see him on the bottom?
Yep.
The nail sank all the way down to the very bottom. Sank to the bottom. So the nail was dense. All right, the plastic bead. So I thought the bead was gonna float. Let's see what happens with the bead. Oh, there he goes. Kind of took him a minute. Where'd the bead go? Oh, looks like he's sitting on top of the bead. Sank through the water, but the bead is sitting top of the syrup.
Honey.
What? Honey.
No.
Syrup, honey. That's you're calling me honey. Okay. So the bead is floating on the honey. So you would say the bead is more dense than the oil, the bead is more dense than the water, but the bead is less dense than the honey because it's floating on the honey. Okay, next we have the marble. Ooh! Where'd the marble go? To the bottom? Looks like the marble's to the bottom.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Marble sank to the bottom. So the marble is most dense of all three of the liquids. Paperclip. What did you think about the paperclip? The paperclip is sitting there on top of the honey. Is it still on top of the honey, or did it sink all the way down?
It went down.
It went all the way down? Yep, sure did. Sank on the, it was on the honey for a minute, but it has sank down to the bottom. Okay, paperclip also sank to the bottom. Paperclip is more dense. And the penny. Ready? Where are you, Penny? What kind of camo's in there? The penny is also at the very, very, very bottom. The penny sank down to the bottom. Okay. Now I forgot to add these over here. I have two things. I have the cork and I have some styrofoam. Styrofoam. Okay, so if you want to pause and make your predictions for the cork and the styrofoam. Now a cork is made of wood. The toothpick was made of wood. So you already know something about the toothpick. So that should help you to make a hypothesis about the cork. All right, let's try this cork. There he is. The cork floats on the oil. Floated, that sounds funny. Floats on the oil. Oh, the cork is less dense. And then we have the styrofoam. And it looks like I'm gonna have to make it a little bit smaller. Making a mess. And the styrofoam is also going to float on the oil. Okay, so let's analyze our data. We have our results, our data. So I noticed that I have 2, 3, 4. I have 4 things that sank all the way down to the bottom. The nail, the marble, the paper clip, and the penny. So I could be thinking, what do these guys have in common? Why did they all sink down to the very bottom? They're all pretty dense, they're pretty compact, which makes them, they have more mass, makes them sink down to the bottom. And then the toothpick floated on top of the oil, and the cork floated on top of the oil, and both of these guys are made of wood. Wood always floats. Styrofoam, what's styrofoam made out of? Air? Plastic? Styrofoam does have a lot of air in it, which helps it to float on top of the oil. Okay? Conclusion. Okay? What did you learn? So, I want you to write your conclusion, and your conclusion should be 2 to 3 sentences, for sure 2, right? Because you have things that are more dense and the things that are least dense. And then you have our little guy here, the bead, who he floated on top of the honey. So you should have 3 sentences about what you learned about your objects and relative density. So you're going to do that on your own. I'm going to check it when you come back to class, and some of you are going to be back to class, not this week, but next week. I will be checking your journal.